Good morning, and first I apologize for being late. I'm a Virgoan, and therefore being on time is my DNA, but Gurgaon Highways defeated me this morning. But it's lovely to be here. Yes, I'm a committed conservationist. And you may well wonder how we intersect. Well, we complement each other. One without the other wouldn't really matter, would it? You can't be a hotel in isolation, and we can't restore monuments in isolation. So yes, I've spent much more than 30 years restoring India's heritage. I finally hung up my boots last year and went back to writing. But I'm going to talk to you really about, the scale of work, the range of work we have done across India. Thank you so much. We deal with synagogues, churches, temples, havelis, the whole lot. And it's really, my work has been driven by who needs it the most. People who approach us as opposed to us approaching people. And I believe it has an important, the top right-hand one actually is the Dwarkadish temple in Ahmedabad, which very nearly collapsed in the 2002 earthquake. So, there are different reasons. But the most important one, and there I'd like to spend a little time talking to you about, is Jaisalmer Fort, which you are all aware is vitally important. It's the last outpost on Western India. It is, for the people of Jaisalmer, the goose that lays the golden egg. And we got involved in it primarily because it was collapsing at that time in what we called rainfall precipitation, but we now know as climate change. So with sudden impact of rainfall, Jaisalmer Fort was pushing back, it was collapsing, the palace collapsed, we came in, restored the palace, and then decided to do a comprehensive study. And I'm raising this to you because it was completely antithetic to what the people of the Qila wanted. They wanted tourism at any cost. And we were saying, you can't get that much water inside the fort. The fort walls are pushing out. We had real social protection issues for our team. Government was on our side. They said, yes, let's empty the fort. No, the fort without the people had no meaning. So we partnered with, these were simpler times in 95, with Aleppo in Syria, because they were putting sewerage and drainage infrastructure in. So we got the experts from Aleppo who advised us. At that time, the Asian Development Bank was funding the government of Rajasthan. We pulled their funding into Jaisalmer and said, right, now we've sorted the water problem. We've provided toilets because the people of Jaisalmer at that time used the moris. Filthy. And the mori is actually where you would get the spectacle of Jaisalmer. So we said toilets. Every household will get a toilet. Because of the narrowness of the streets, and I don't know how smaller cities like Fez cope with it, we had to put the toilet at the front of the house. Big mistake. Every house that had a toilet became a guest house. You doubled the water consumption. It stressed the already stressed wastewater drainage system. Big problem. Anyway, people still went back to the mori. It was still filthy. And one day, all of you will be familiar with the Suryagarh Fort, Suryagarh Hotel in Jaisalmer. So the owner came over to see us, and he said, I can't run this hotel in this filthy fort, because that's all there is to do here. And I said, Manvinda, what do you expect us to do? The municipality says they won't clear the garbage on air-size fort slopes, because the slopes are really tons and tons and tons of garbage thrown over by the hotels all along the edge of the fort, the guest houses. He said, will you let me try? he bought 50 T-shirts and 50 caps, which said, "I love Jaisalmer," and they cleaned the entire embankment of the fort over 3 weekends. And that's when I said to the World Monuments Fund, I said, it's time to go. They have taken over and transferred to the residents the better management of the fort. So that was where tourism stepped in. It mattered to them. And the other big restoration project we undertook was at Basco. I think part of me lives in Ladakh, so I was very, very keen. So I'm talking about 2004, when hardly anybody went to Ladakh. We took food up with our teams. We trekked to the top of the site. There was no road. But what you had at the end of it was a UNESCO award-winning, incredible site. But I want to just say to you that traditionally, the restoration and management of the Gompas of Ladakh, I see there's somebody there, was done by the community. And so we used the community and their service to bring material up to the site. We calculated what that would cost per head, per day, per load, made this presentation to the American Express in New York, and said, monetize this and give us the money to restore the site. And so we did, and we moved on to the next site, which was even more difficult to reach, and we went through the same exercise. We asked the community to help do what they did. The important thing, how do I go back? Anyway, the important thing in Basco was to understand by the conservation of these somewhat remoter sites, you spread tourism. There is a terrible idea of concentration of tourism. We also got involved with Mughal garden in Agra because, hey, they built a highway to Agra. I calculated that you could leave Delhi at 7 in the morning, be at the Taj at 9, see the site, and be back in Delhi for lunch. No benefit to Agra. No dispersal, an overloaded site. Today, to get to the Taj, inside the Taj, is a nightmare. Of course, we have differential ticketing now. But it's a disaster for the hoteliers. There's nothing else to see. The infrastructure in the city hasn't added up to be able to get to Itmaduddaulah. And currently, I'm working in Fatehpur Sikri. It's an even bigger nightmare. So yes, tourism needs to look at last mile connectivity. How do we build to get more sites, to get more room nights, and to get away from this sort of hit and run? The monument by itself doesn't work. It needs a good hotel, it needs shops, it needs restaurants, it needs arts, crafts, and everything you've pulled together. In our larger cities, we've not pulled this together. So we picked a garden to restore, hoping to provide to the visitor a more experiential garden where you would understand how Mughal gardens were designed, laid out. It was about the senses. There had to be water and fruit and fragrance and shade. It was everything you needed in paradise, but actually to live in Agra. We thought this would be a great oasis for the residents of Agra. So they open it to the local residents. The big challenge here was water, because the Jamna is so highly contaminated. It's contaminated in Delhi. By the time it gets to Agra, it's a putrid drain. The first 2 years, plants just died. So we spent a fortune putting in a water system. We spent, I suppose more than 2/3 of the budget putting in a water purification system. And we said to the Archaeological Survey of India, We now have pure drinking water. The village adjacent doesn't. Why don't we supply pure drinking water to them? Now, that didn't gel. But I think the advantage here is the site. I saw yesterday a photograph is beautifully restored and beautifully kept, beautifully maintained. But there's no connection with the community. You're really not giving back. You're giving back to India in a concept of its heritage, but you're not giving back to the people whose heritage this is. So but I think the largest swath of work we did was in Madhya Pradesh. We had at one time 27 sites we restored. We worked with the Madhya Pradesh government. It was a partnership made in heaven. We did the planning. They did the execution, monitored by us. No connectivity. You cannot reach half these sites. So I know there's a tremendous amount of effort going into Gujarat, and Rajasthan, of course, is top of the pops. I think they took this on about 20 years. They're 20 years ahead. But we don't even know what exists in Madhya Pradesh. It's on the lower, the Kannats, these water systems. My God, they are across the country. We have destroyed them. I mean, please understand, these are the system brought by the Persians into the Deccan, starting at Burhanpur. These are underground water conservation systems. Now everybody's got very excited and they're trying to restore them. But, yeah. So, Lal Bagh in Indore. There's hardly a hotel worthy of the name. You can go as far as Maheshwar. We spent most of the pandemic getting this incredible palace restored. Every silk was rewoven, every carpet restored. They came from Kashmir, and it was a little COVID bubble. And the workmen just sat here and restored the palace. It was funded by Indigo, who then ran out of money, so we had to abandon it. But the government was so thrilled with the 5 rooms we did that they have put in a huge amount of money to finish it. So there you have a destination, if that ever became a tourism hub. So yeah, it's a brilliant project. But it's also rare to have everybody live in situ when you get going. Training is an essential element, so out of every project there are different skill sets being taught. We found old curtains and balances and so on in the storeroom, pulled them out, and they were, most of them were restored in situ because we were so terrified of removing them, and trained maybe 10 or 11 people in textile. I think the great advantage here is most things had not been destroyed. We had a 20-year engagement at the Osmania University College, Hyderabad. Most of you would know it as the residency of the White Mughal. The entire roof had caved in. It was a very difficult project because the money was so huge. Every year we raised 2 or 3 crores and did a little more. So it took much longer than most, but the scale of it was phenomenal. And I think it's very satisfying when you look back at, when you see it, and it's fully used by a women's college now, the Telangana something Vishwavidyalaya, Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, and richly used. I mean, it's a concert center, it's a performance center, there's lots of stuff happening there, and very much a tourism attraction in Hyderabad. And then there's, of course, the Museum of Sacred Art in Rashal in Goa. Lost that. It's something we approached in the very early years of Goa's tourism, long before it became an overcrowded, overused, and abused destination. But I think the fun thing here was that the grand old houses of Goa all had their own churches, and they all had their own valuables. There were ivory and silver and gold and incredible tapestry. And they approached us, and they said, we have no way to protect this. So we got into an agreement with the church and the Goa government, and we said, all right, a museum for the private collections. That's a difficult thing because you have to provide security, et cetera, et cetera. It worked. And then the government arrived, and they said, the churches have sacristies full of things. So it took us about 8 or 9 years. We had curators come out from Portugal because we had no idea how to tell the story of all these artifacts. They're not in our thinking. And then it had a 10-year lease in Rashol. It's now been moved into the World Heritage Site of Goa at Santa Monica. And as you can see, it has the most incredible collection of artifacts which tell a complete story of how this was actually the Rome of the East in its day, 400, 500 years ago. We tend to forget that Goa is now a beach destination with palm trees, but it was a very tough ecclesiastical center. Am I running out of time? And then we set up interpretation centers. At the top, we have, that was at Agra, at the Taj Mahal. It stayed like that. Nobody ever had the courage to open it. We set one up at Itmudadola. Beautiful, absolutely little jewels. But you know, you set it up in 2019. By 2022, electronic ticketing came in. Nobody wanted to go through the interpretation center. So gradually, you know, and the one here at Usmania is a maintenance issue because the college simply is not equipped to deal with maintaining a resource center, which really just tells you the story of the site. Now it's all on your app, and I just sometimes think to see it is richer than to see it on your app, but I'm a warhorse dinosaur. So this I would like to talk about a little bit because we spoke earlier about the Kannauts at Burhanpur, and you have this cluster of cities, Bijapur, Gulbarga, and Bidar, which are extraordinary. Their range and depth and breadth of their heritage is the unsung hero of India. It's impossible to get there. It really is a tough call. I think one hotel in Bijapur, that's it, basic. With the most incredible wealth of heritage. We opted to work on the water systems because we found when we went to, it was sent to us as an application, the Karnataka government, in their infinite wisdom, used the water system for sewage disposal. And so we went to the district administration, we went to the government of Karnataka and said, hello, this is perhaps recognized today as one of the most scientifically thorough and one of the best water management and conservation systems ever devised for arid regions, and we're bleeding for water. You have water ATMs in Bijapur, I want to tell you. And they said, well, you know, even if we got it clean, even if we used the World Bank money to clean it and put an alternate sewage system in, he said, now psychologically, nobody's going to use it. It's finished, it's over. And so that really, you know, was a very sad note when you think that something as sophisticated and that ran between these three cities, that you looked not just at water harvesting, but at watershed management, before climate change became the critical issue it is today, we wrecked it. And that's probably one of the reasons why we have the issue. Anyway, we picked on Taj Bauri, which is the largest Bauri. It was made in the memory of his wife, Adil Shah's wife. Adil Shah was the famous Sultan of Bijapur who worshipped Saraswati. So, you know, there's that whole narrative that makes this site so much richer to be in. But we chose it really because when I was standing there with the head of the Waqf, he said, the Ganesh Visarjan takes place here. And in today's day of binary politics, of black and white, we said, this is it. It's the shade of gray we're going to work in. Because this is India. It is this great merging of cultures and multicultural uses of sites. So here we are. I've left behind a site being brilliantly restored with a tank being placed alongside so that it's not contaminated by the dyes used in the painting of the Ganesh Murtis. So yeah, I think that one's going to be very satisfying. But undoubtedly, I think the most satisfying and exciting project was the engagement we had with IHCL at the Taj for over 10 or 12 years. As I said to you, we worked at Itmatuddaulah to try and see whether we could find some system of tourism dispersal. Today, I'm working in Fatehpur Sikri to try and find the same, because you have this little hub that is so extraordinarily well known, but that's all there is. It's this pearl that sits in the middle of a very, very challenged city. It's challenged for infrastructure. It's challenged as a destination. I've stood in forums for years in Agra saying, go to Jaipur, see how they fixed it. I think Jaipur got the recipe of city, tourist, and how they serve each other right. Agra, for some strange reason, has this extraordinary site at the Supreme Court judgment of 1996, which forbade any industrial development in the area. It served the Taj Mahal well, but it was a disaster for the city because 1.5 million people directly and 4 million people indirectly lost their jobs. So, we can say, yes, this was a benchmark Supreme Court judgment, but we've never looked at what happened to the 4 million people who are now accosting every tourist that arrives at the Taj. Going to the Taj is a challenging experience. And in 2025, 75 years after 78 years after India's independence, you have an entry for foreigners and an entry for Indians. That we need to think about. And the Indians stand for as much as 4 to 5 hours to get through security to get into the Taj. Why? Because it is in our culture to revere our forefathers. So the motivation of the domestic tourist, either on his way back from Ajmer or on his way back from Mathura, his motivations are completely different, and we don't cater to it. They're paying 10 rupees or 20 rupees. We don't cater. We don't think about the 4 or 5 hours he stood in blazing heat. That actually drove us to write our second book. I worked with Rahul Mehrotra at this site, and then we got into what happened to the Taj Mahal. We discovered here, we discovered here Shah Jahan's entrance. So Shah Jahan never traveled by road to the Taj Mahal. You would have to spread velvet carpets and gold ashrafis before him. He was a very expensive traveler if he were to travel from the Agra fort to the Taj and enter, heaven forbid, through the Commoner's Gate. So where am I? Did I press something? So here is where he entered. And therefore, your whole understanding of the site changed. Where we enter today, and we call the main gate, was actually the back gate for the commoners. Royalty and the nobility, Shah Jahan actually entered from here. The nobility were only ever allowed onto the platform. There was a hierarchy to attend the Taj, much like there was a hierarchy to attend the court of the emperor. They weren't simply allowed. So I'll just go back to that for a second, because what you had then was Shah Jahan coming down the river. On the right-hand side, he had the Taj Mahal, which was sacred. He built it as his immortal offering as paradise. It was paradise in stone. And on the left-hand side, he built Amita Baig, which was a mirror image in planning to the Taj, but was a pleasure garden. It had baradaris, it had a huge octagonal pond on the same scale as the Taj Mahal, and they were mirror images of each other. It was a whole plan that extended from Kachpura all the way to Tajganj. Every element was thought through. We were chatting the other day, there's a lot of pressure nowadays on where was the Taj, what was it doing before? We all know that the pressures that come on these monuments, but you know, it was a bagicha. It was the gardens of Raja Man Singh, who had married into the family, so it was a family deal to acquire the land from Kachpura. And it went as far as Kachpura village, which exists to this day. It's just, we learned through the writing of this book to tell the whole story, and I think we don't often tell the story. You're squeezed in through a security squeeze, and you arrive at the monument, you look at it, say, "Vah," and leave. It has much larger narratives, and the Interpretation Center would have told that. And so then I'd like to finish with this particular church, because I probably started my career at the Afghan church and went to Bombay, and everybody said, we must protect the Afghan church. We said, yes, we must protect the Afghan church. We hadn't a clue. I'm going back to 1988. Hadn't a clue. But we got hold of the grand ladies of Bombay and said, make a committee, hold a concert, let's raise money. And so they did, and over time, 5 lakhs was raised, and a little bit was repaired, and then somebody else raised 6 lakhs, and some other little bit of it was repaired. And life moved away from the Afghan church. I disappeared into Ladakh and beyond. And then about 2-3 years ago, Citibank said, what would you like to do in Bombay that's really meaningful? And off the top of my head, I said Afghan church. And we had so much money that the whole church got restored in its entirety. But what also I realized that in those 35 years, India had built huge expertise. We knew exactly what to do. We knew exactly where to source them. We had material conservators. We had woodworkers who came in from Kerala, set up camp, and rebuilt the roof. We had somebody who could actually repair the belfry. And most extraordinarily, we took down what looked like 3 coffins hanging on the wall, were the 6 flags that came back from the first and second Afghan wars, original, with huge poles and a little gold crown at the top. And I came back, and I was chatting at a cocktail party to somebody, and I said, you know, it's amazing. They've gone off now, and the flags will be restored. But look at the history I learned in school. 1 man came back alive from the Afghan wars. I said, 1 man couldn't have carried those 6 poles. And he said, well, you know, my great-grandfather was in the second Afghan war. And we then set about finding a military historian who collaborated with the Imperial War Museum. And we have installed as our layer of the Afghan church's history a recognition of all the regiments that fought in the Afghan wars, the bulk of whom were Indian. And nobody has ever spoken about the Indians before. So on that, we got the GOC to come and unveil it, and he said, why don't you say where the regiments are? Well, I said 40 or 50% of them are now in Pakistan. So yeah, and a lot of them disappeared over time. So yes, we must serve each other. We each have a role to play in this canvas that is India. And one without the other would be diminished. You cannot have a hotel in isolation. It really serves, I mean, it's all very comfortable. It's where you retreat to after you have felt the sights, senses, sounds, and the pulse of India. And we're committed to the sights, senses, sounds, and pulse of India. So thank you, and I wish you all good luck in your deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amita, for that absolutely riveting talk. I mean, I was right in the front, and I'm just kind of summarizing some of the most amazing insights that I learned, or AI learned. The one is this Dwarkadish temple in Ahmedabad that you kind of developed, which almost collapsed in the 2002 earthquake. The Jaisalmer Fort experience, where you talked about, was impacted by climate change, and how the partnership with Aleppo, as you said, in those less complicated times with Syria, the funding by ADB Bank, installation of toilets resulted in they becoming guest houses, then efforts by the Suryagar Manvendra to do all that. Then the community of the Gompas in Ladakh, absolutely interesting. Then you spoke about Agra. Before that, Madhya Pradesh and those, what are they called? Those Kannats, right?
Kannats.
Yeah.
Kannats.
And then those visuals of the Osmania University transformation. Before that, Madhya Pradesh. And finally, the historical water systems of the Bijapur, Gulbarga. I mean, it was absolutely a historical lesson. So I'm also summarizing this because there's a lot that she shared. And finally, about the entrance of Shah Jahan from back, which is now the front, and the Afghan church, the Afghan church restoration, which took 40 years of tenacity, and the Citibank deal did it at the end. So absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure we all did. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Any questions they might have? Actually, yeah. Any questions? I mean, there's a lot that she shared. I think she just, any thoughts? Any questions? Yeah.
I was going to come and ask you this separately, but what happened to the Chinatown project in Calcutta? Do you remember you came and we, we had that wonderful...
They gave a beautiful little proposal for a interpretation center in where the original Nanking was.
Tireti Bazaar.
And then I retired. So I left it with Priya. I can send it to you.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Some you just have to let go. It's now.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have a question. So you did this for 40 years, and you did it in a space which is where you have to work across stakeholders, government, private sector, NGOs, entrepreneurs. I mean, what's the tenacity? I mean, what's the DNA? What made you do this for 40 years?
I think, my job was really to get the right people to do the right thing in the right place with the right partners. I don't actually do the work. I have to find the right people to do it, the right partnerships, sign the right agreements. What gave me the tenacity is because every single project you do in India is unique. Nothing is the same. Nothing is nothing. Everything is different. Every relationship is different. Every government is different. Every element you work with, it's rewarding. You have, just different ways of working. You could say we've restored 3 sets of wall paintings in Ladakh, and they're the same. They're not, because every community you deal with has a different compulsion. And so I'll just go back on that a little bit, because the government protects, in a strange way, some of the monasteries of Ladakh, but they don't respect the fact that you and I cannot touch the Buddha. It is sacred. So the lesson we learnt was that our team sat with the monks and taught them to restore.
Oh, wow.
So that's
what a
the
story,
kind of,
I mean.
that's the kind of legacy we leave. We've left, yeah. And the lady who headed the team in Ladakh, for our Ladakh projects, today she is working at reviving the weaving of the Chandhan tribals. So, you know, you leave behind little, if you can leave behind a little knowledge and a little hope and a little better building, I think, yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? I have the final say.
You're valiant.
In the last 30 years, a lot of private entrepreneurs have created a lot of wealth, a few of them. Have any of them got into restorations and supporting, or is it largely still corporate government? I mean, have you seen any of the private entrepreneurs investing? Like they're building Ashoka universities. I mean, there's a lot of...
No, I think it's still largely corporate. And I think because I work in the NGO sector, we're very careful we don't get into the commercialized use, and therefore I think that makes us a little distinct from the hoteliering profession. We don't touch a commercial reuse.
Okay.
I think it's valid, it needs it.
Yeah, it needs it.
But in the NGO sector, it has a different pulse. So no, I mean, certainly in my experience, government is a very big funder. And
the World Banks and all that. Yeah.
World Bank will do what they do.
Yeah.
If you have a good enough partnership with the government that's sitting there, and you know, just as you're at the finish line, we all know the right man gets transferred. You start the whole cycle again. But yeah, it's exhausting. But you know, if I look back at it, I think I loved every minute.
Yeah, man. And for me, the one point takeaway was the point when you said about the Mughal garden, that you built a water system for the entire garden, but you could not give it to the village on the next to it. That was,
it's the way it is.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks. I mean, really, I enjoyed it. I personally enjoyed it tremendously. I thank you again.